and welcome back to Learn It From a Layman. No, we did not die.
Shut your face, Carl. We're all tired of listening to you.
You see yourself out of this podcast right now.
Carl, that was way too polite a response, considering what I said.
Any response to you at any time is more polite than you deserve. So.
Ouch, that's rude.
Try to calm down and think about this logically. What's the best way to resolve this?
Punched him in the face.
What if we changed our podcast topic and from what we were going to talk about
to boxing?
Yeah, and to talking about how and when to be polite or not.
Or what if that was going to be our original topic?
Well,
quit making stuff up, Carl.
The audience won't know if it was or wasn't.
Okay. So Tim apparently is starting to fight back against my verbal spurs at the beginning of every podcast. So,
well, I just saw an opportunity, considering our topic, to illustrate our topic, and simultaneously.
Tim, beginning of every podcast is supposed to start with me making fun of you, or generally making some dig.
And it's in my contract.
Exactly. What am I paying you for? Okay. All right. So the topic of this podcast will be, should I be polite and how? And we're going to just discuss some different scenarios in which you might wonder how to be polite, or if you should be polite, or different scenarios where you might find yourself dealing with people that are not, and how to react. So I think that's where we start. So Cameron, did you want to start with maybe an anecdote about politeness?
Well, as someone who is required to be polite for their job, regardless how agitated a guest or customer is, I feel that I sometimes am slighted to what I would like to say to people.
Yeah. Contractually obligated to not curse at your customers, I think. So.
Well, I will throw this out there. I do feel that if I actually do get angry and let a guest or a customer see that, I feel that I've actually lost in every situation, because as long as I can keep a clear head and stay calm, I can often control the situation better.
Yeah, that's a good point. Tim?
I think that Cameron's getting really at the core of it. Politeness is actually a tool and a skill that allows you...
Stop the name calling, Tim. Oh
That's right. Forgive me. I'm just a naturally rude person.
Apparently.
I'm not a fool or a robot.
That's right. But it allows you to maintain control of a situation. I'll add something more to that. I think in almost every case, rudeness serves only the person who is being rude. If you're actually trying to improve a situation, you're not going to be rude. If you're resorting to, impoliteness in its many forms, you're doing so because either one, you've given up on the situation, or two, you are indulging in a desire to vent your own emotions to the detriment of the situation and to other people involved. If you can't tell, I'm a major fan of politeness.
I'm going to throw a third one in there for you. That they have been conditioned that depending on how rude they are, they will actually receive some sort of compensation.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, so I think both of you so far, though, are only talking about being rude or / impolite in a manner where you are doing it aware of the situation, self-aware of how you're acting. I think a lot of scenarios you actually find people being impolite or rude because either their culture is different, or their not familiar with the particular situation and what the expectations are in that situation. So I think a lot of other things come into play as far as, when if you grew up in a family that, and in some case it's still can be rude. It's not like it's all up to perception, but yeah, like for example, Cameron, you work at a hospital, at a hotel, and some people, I believe, grow up thinking that they're very entitled to particular level of service or niceties, and if they don't receive it, then it is more incumbent on them to let everyone know that this isn't living up to expectations and you need to fix it. Not that they're necessarily being rude per se, but they're it is their job to let you know that you're not doing your job or something along those lines. Which so
we all mutter about those people.
Yeah. I have met many an individual that has let me know that I have failed them, or the hotel has failed them, and by which I have now failed them, and because I am their only point of contact, sometimes that it is my fault, my problem, and I need to fix it.
Right.
Many a situation I can't actually fix it.
Right.
Where I originally thought you were actually going to go with this, thought you were going to be like, in some families, like you can reach across the table and grab an item of food, and that's
there
totally
is that as well.
culturally
Yes.
accepted, versus other families that would be, a very gross taboo.
Right. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And the idea of, talking over someone, just noise level and just the way you, what you meet each other, do you handshake? Is it just hi? Is it a hug? Is it, those types of things can be awkward or seem impolite if you are kind of a standoffish type of person, and the other very, it's like my big fat Greek wedding type of scenario, and you don't know what
What do you
how to act.
mean you don't eat no meat?
Exactly.
Okay. I make lamb.
Yeah, and so I know in my in my life, and I think this is Tim's job also can give us good insight to it. Like, so we expect people that interact with Cameron and his job to hopefully mostly be kind of adult, and so we have this expectation that if they're being jerks to Cameron, that's because they're jerks, right? Not because they're being rude, they're being impolite, and they're choosing to do that. In some cases, I'm sure that's the case, and they should control themselves. But I think in Tim's scenario, where he's a teacher and he has a lot of students that are just oblivious, right? They're just immature. They have no. They've never been taught to be polite. They've never had the schooling on what you say to your elders and how you speak to those in authority, and so they feel like they can talk back, and so my belief is generally some of those kids never grow up, right? They never get that instruction. They never get that ability to handle a situation in what's viewed generally as a polite way, and so I think it's something that helps me when I meet someone that's incredibly rude is I try to understand where they're coming from, and understand that they probably aren't here to be mean and rude and hate me. Never. I think there's someone's razor. I learned about this recently. It's never attribute to malice what you can attribute to stupidity. And so, yeah, exactly. I'll have to look up whose razor that is before the end here. Anyway, but the idea is that if there's if you can say, okay, this person's just uneducated and generally unintelligent, then it's easier to deal with that than it is to be, this person hates me and they're being a jerk and I want to punch them,
And that I think is a neat, that's a mental trick you can do to kind of synthesize patience, right? And it's funny because ironically you're assuming a superior kind of a condescending stance, and sometimes
it's my go-to. Sorry.
The what?
That's my go-to. I always just assume I'm better. So.
That's right. Well, I mean, naturally.
Why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
See,
But
and
sometimes
it's the same level as me. So
say
that's
again?
interesting. I always feel that people are the same level as me, same intelligence, grew up with the same knowledge, have same, background, general knowledge things. See, Carl assumes he's superior. That's interesting.
Well, and in Carl's defense, I think there are numerous cases where you can justifiably kind of make that assumption. If a kid's being rude to you, you can. I mean, this sounds harsh, but you can assume, okay, that kid is still growing up and still learning and hasn't matured and will eventually. And I've actually seen this happen where kids who are, exquisitely rude and belligerent, who have gone on to become very nice, decent adults, they figure things out. And so you kind of have that thought in your mind. It gives you some patience with and some perspective on a situation that otherwise would really rub you wrong. So yeah, I think that's a useful tool to have. Again, being careful how we use that. I think there could be times if I encounter an adult who say a vagrant on the street who is rude to me somehow, I could employ that technique and be like, oh well, he's just some vagrant, blah blah blah, doesn't have as genteel of culture as I do, and I could, unfairly maybe judge that person who perhaps had, dealing with, a severe mental illness or something, and things that I don't know about. So I'd say apply judiciously.
Yeah. So let me take two things. First of all, it's Hanlon's razor. So never attribute to malice that which is adequate.
Darn it! I was going to claim it before you looked it up. But,
Okay. Secondly, to clarify, I guess I don't necessarily see it as looking down on the person, but like viewing another culture is the way I guess I look at it more like.
Okay. I see.
Not that I'm somehow better than they are, but that like what I view as rude and mean and full of malice is in their world and in their culture. Acceptable in some way, and so it's not necessarily that I think that I'm somehow their superior, but more that I'm getting a window into what they believe and what they feel by seeing their behavior, and so I can then kind of adjust my expectations accordingly, and so yeah, not necessarily putting myself on a higher plane, but at least better understand where they're coming from.
I see. Kind of an assumption check. Like, hey, wait a second. Let me let me pause and consider. Okay.
Yeah, and that can be tough.
Cool.
I mean,
Yeah.
generally,
Okay,
like.
so,
Sorry, go ahead, Cameron.
I was going to say, so like some cultures, it's perfectly acceptable to be extremely direct, whereas in America that may come off rude, being overly direct. Like, this was really crappy work. Why did you turn this in? Versus in America, it would be like, this isn't your best. Let's do this again.
Right. I assume, yeah, that is true. And I think we can understand that across like country boundaries or language boundaries. We understand that, different countries handle things differently. And so we give foreigners kind of this pass, like this mulligan, as far as saying, okay, they just do it differently. Whereas, Americans, we kind of assume this monolithic understanding of politeness, and I don't think that's always the case. If you grew up in a household where as a single mother, she's out working all the time, and you just didn't get the opportunity to spend a lot of time at the dinner table discussing, politeness and whatever else. It's just not something that was in your life growing up. Then it's not something you internalized, and so you're going to have a different reception, a different way that you act to situations, and there are lots of different scenarios where people are going to act differently. And like I said, if you go in assuming that they are full of malice towards you and that this impoliteness is of volition, that this is volitional, they're looking at you and thinking, I hate this person, then you've lost control of the situation.
Yeah.
Right? You've certainly lost potential to connect with the person at any level. And but if you can assume, okay, this isn't a situation where I understand where they're coming from, but I can at least understand that this is they probably don't hate me. They just don't know this situation isn't being handled in the way that I would assume that it should be.
Yeah, and let me give one example to kind of demonstrate how I think this can play out, and how this kind of this approach that you're talking about can be employed. And you mentioned how in education sometimes we deal with rude individuals, rude students, or whatever. Sometimes educators can become really jaded, or people observing, kids being really mean and nasty, and really question the decency or common courtesy of these students. And I think one thing that helps to process this is to understand the power dynamic that's going on. When you understand the dynamics at play, it can explain a lot of behaviors. For example, in a school, it's an authoritarian structure in a lot of ways. Kids are told what to do, where to go, and how to act. And while most kids recognize that this is a benevolent authoritarian structure, we're doing it to help them learn and create a learning environment. A lot of times, kids respond to that authoritarian structure with resistance. They don't like being told what to do. Perhaps they have, for whatever reason, they don't trust the system or the people running the show, and so they engage in resistance, which translates a lot of times into rudeness, either overt or covert, kind of passive aggressive stuff. When you think about that, if you translate to that mindset, you recognize that these are behaviors that we often extol in individuals in other situations. For example, a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany, we would, engaging in passive aggressive resistance against prison guards and that kind of thing, that's honorable, that's good to do. They're resisting. And that doesn't mean they're a rude person, but they're acting out to resist a situation they view as unjust or unfair or unwarranted. When our students do it in schools, I'm in no way condoning it, but recognizing that a lot of students are responding to the authority structure with this same kind of resistance helps to explain that they're not a bad person. And in fact, this is often a reason why students, once people get out of school, they turn into like decent, well-behaved and contributing citizens, because they're no longer resisting this authoritarian structure. So anyways, when you step back and look at the dynamics and kind of ask yourself, not only what's the background of this person, but also how are they perceiving this interaction, it helps to explain a lot of times rudeness that otherwise would just be interpreted as, this jerk is, that he just flipped me off. What?
Right.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I get what you're saying, but wouldn't that stem back to even when they get older and enter into the adult community, if they encountered another like authoritative boss, wouldn't they then revert back to their subversive methods?
I think that's a good point. And you do see, they talk about the school to prison pipeline, where one of the critiques of public education is that a portion of our population is essentially groomed to to live a life of in the prison system and whatnot. So I think that does happen. I think there's other factors at play, of course, large socioeconomic, cultural, and so forth factors. So again, it's not all. It's just attributable just to that resistance to authority thing, and some kids are more successful at turning it off than others. Probably a lot of it depends on what they're seeing in other parts of their community. If if this kid sees the role models in this kid's community are living in accord with the power structures in the greater society, then they'll probably end up following suit. If role models they see in their community are not, then maybe they won't. Again, that's a gross oversimplification, but I don't know, just shooting from the hip.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit it pretty well there. But I would also, I think we all can also say that we've all had a friend or someone that we've known that have always been like, man, every boss I have sucks and is always getting on me. I think we all have a friend like that as well. One that
Yeah.
never grew up out of
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think what one essentially what you're saying, especially when you're looking at when you're saying that these kids and adults as well, look at their role models and or their heroes and kind of. So I mean, we have goals, right? If you, in order to talking, I guess now about more like how do you be polite? You got to consider what you want to achieve, right? And that has a lot to do with if you're going to look up the people that are doing what you want to do, or at least in a way that you want to do it, or something, and that you can aspire to. So you're going to have goals that you want to achieve, and so if you consider those goals in any situation, right? So take it from the macro to the micro. Look at any situation where you come across interactions, be it at the dinner table, be it at a workplace, be it at school, and you have to consider, okay, what are we trying to achieve here? Because politeness takes on different forms, right? Being always the one that's quietly sitting in the corner isn't always polite, right? That can be also viewed as kind of reclusive, and it can be snooty, or it can be there are a bunch of ways that it can be interpreted. But so you got to consider your goals. What are you there for? What are you trying to achieve? And then you observe how other people are interacting. I think that's a big part of it. When you start a new job, in order to figure out where and how people interact, and what is viewed as polite and what is viewed as positive, is you observe. You figure out, okay, this is kind of how the dynamics work here, and then you put yourself on that spectrum. You say, look, I really want to be respectful. I want to be, and in this workplace or in this this community, this is how I achieve that, and so by looking around, I figure out how that fits, and then I mimic, right? Then I start putting those behaviors into practice that I saw, and then I observe reactions, and then I see people react to the way that I'm acting, and I adjust and I refine going forward. And so it's kind of the utilitarian look at politeness, and I don't think politeness is just utilitarian. I don't think we only are polite in order to achieve an end. I do believe that politeness can be an end unto itself, but I do think that it's useful to consider, where you're trying to go and what you're trying to accomplish, and make the adjustments accordingly.
Good. Yeah, I think that's a sensible approach.
So,
Yes.
If you're at a dinner with a girl that you're dating, which none of us are and haven't been in a long time, but
I still date my girl.
Hey, nice. Dang it, Cameron, just show me up, right? Yeah, I mean, you're going to act, you're going to act nicer. Most likely, you're going to try to show your best self. And so if you consider that is your best self, and under those situations, you're trying to put off your best qualities, that should be something that you then can hopefully adjust and refine to be able to use in other scenarios as well, right? When you're at a level of heightened awareness, you are more aware of what's your own flaws, and that's a good opportunity then to hopefully work on those.
Mm-hmm. I want to take a moment here to call out everyone who's listening for what I think is an under-considered source of rudeness.
Not donating to our podcast?
That's right. Terribly rude. Come on. If you're listening, we ought to do like one of those telethon.
33030.
Now we're on the air for 14 more hours, and
please call it at 555-555.
Operators are standing by, and they will be polite to you. But no, the brave new world of politeness is cell phone use and device use. And one of the things that I think people aren't thinking about is the way that cell phone use and devices in general dilute our interactions with the people we love and the people around us. Think about the last time you were, having a conversation with your wife, your friend, a roommate, a neighbor, or family member, and you were checking your phone while you were talking to them. That dilutes the conversation. Your responses are delayed, and clear or muddy, the message you send is you're not worth my undivided attention. And none of us intentionally, I think, send that message, but that's a message that we often send. So anyways, I've been thinking about that in my own life and how maybe I need to change some of my habits and just have times where I just have my phone put away completely, from when I get home until, this point in the day, so that I can give my attention undivided to the people around me. Anyways, thoughts?
I definitely can see where you're going with that. I can do a relation to this actually with myself. Sometimes as I'm falling asleep in bed, I like to listen to one of my audiobooks, or I like to play a game on my phone. And oftentimes my wife likes to talk to me while I'm doing that. And sometimes I feel myself frustrated that she wants to carry a conversation on with me because I want to pick up the phone. And I'm like, well, that is like, that's the dumbest thing ever. Why would I feel frustrated that she wants to talk to me and I, spend time with me? So I find it, it's a very relatable thing. Sometimes you can feel irritated, like, well, I'm doing something, and it's like, I'm actually not doing anything. I'm just relaxing. And it's actually more relaxing talking to my, my spouse, my partner,
Right.
So put down that phone and actually relax and enjoy your family and your spouse. I totally agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it is.
Cameron, could you say it one more time? I was checking my phone.
Okay. Okay. No,
it's awkward.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I do think it's kind of one of the. This is a scenario where we're having cultural changes, right? And I think that they are generally, not to the good. They're very deleterious to our interaction as a society. They're and yeah. So, but I do think it's becoming more accepted that, oh yeah, he's on his phone. Like, okay, I'm gonna get on my phone. Like, we don't need it, and we just kind of tune each other out. And it's kind of becoming expected, and so it's not as impolite now as it used to be, which is, I think, unfortunate. And I think we're reaping the effects of that type of lack of ability to interact in a way that is meaningful. And I don't have all the time, and this harkens back to a many months ago podcast where we talked about the Twitter mob, where there is no expectation of any type of polite interaction on the internet, right? Even on Facebook, where these are at most friends of a friend, that's the furthest distance away. Generally, you're going to comment on something, and I've seen literally shouting, screaming matches, as much as all words capitalized is just a shouting match. And there's no expectation of like, okay, this person is also a human and clearly a friend of my friend, and let me not, put consecutive curse words together, calling them names because they are of a different mind than I am. There's no expectation of privacy. There's no idea of what we're going to accomplish, because the only thing that's being accomplished is let me scream my opinion into the void. And so, yeah, I think a lot of this is having bad effects as far as what we strive for, as far as being polite and being able to understand other people's cultures and their point of view.
And as a teacher, let me just point out and say that we culturally seem to be embracing this huge social experiment with our children in tow with very little consideration. I think it would be wise to consider that it might be good to let a child develop their social norms without all of this complication of social media and technology before we start giving them oh, here's a phone for you, or here's, a device.
Yep.
We just haven't
Yep.
really considered deeply, I think, and our kids are going to pay for that.
Yeah. And I also think that there's that end of the spectrum where we're essentially telling people to zone out and just go, where there's no expectation of particular politeness. But there's also the flip side of it that we kind of get cut off from people, and we don't have the ability to resolve issues in a face-to-face manner. We're kind of scared to do that, and so we on the internet we all scream at each other, and then when we go face-to-face we don't talk about anything meaningful, because how could we do that? You can't talk politics, you can't talk religion, you can't talk, heck, you can't even talk sports anymore without offending people, right? So so this idea that we can't engage and interact, and you give me your opinion and I give you my opinion, and we come to a kind of, we're searching for a truth here, not just a bunch of opinions, and so that I think is becoming lost. This idea of everyone's offended at everyone else's ideas, and so you have to go anonymous, screaming to everyone on the internet, because there's no other way to do it.
Yeah, you're angry that Google set up monitors on their for their forums, huh?
Yeah.
It was in the New York Times a couple days ago that Google, they've decided their online forums have gotten out of control and are swaying politics and things like that. So they're actually putting up moderators and stuff like that, and they can't talk about politics anymore at work. Anyway, I was actually going to I was thinking about the cell phone. I was thinking of cell phone accessories, and I think we're losing a lot of, if you walk into a room and you see someone with headphones on, it's a clear nonverbal cue that they don't want to be bothered. Whereas everyone is wearing headphones now, and stuff like that.
You got the AirPods.
Changing things. Like the other day, I totally thought this guest was talking to me while I was checking him in. I thought he had hung up his call because I could see it that he was talking. And then I thought he started talking to me because he turned and was talking, kind of the same thing. And he's like, "Oh no, sorry, that was the call." And I was like, "I'm sorry." It's just
right. Yes.
So
that's a good point.
I have great, random things that happen to me about stuff like that all the time, and I get it. And my favorites, they're they're talking and we're like, "I'm so sorry, this is going," and we do this kind of pass whisper while they're on this conference call or, this important thing. And I understand that, and we accommodate that. That's definitely showing some manners, but, we go back to our parents' time, or I'm checking in an old person or something or an older individual. And if I receive a call and try to answer it and even to put them on hold, sometimes they're greatly offended to see even that I did that, because, I'm in front of you. You need to engage me. I'm the most important person to you right now. So there's definitely, even, within the culture, you have to understand who you're talking to. So it's just, I find it very interesting. Just in my job, there's lots of little nuances that so if I do answer the phone, depending on the generation, I'm like, I'm just going to answer the phone and put them on hold, and then I'll get back to you. Sometimes that's what I say, so they understand that I still acknowledge that they're my priorities. So it's kind of an interesting little thing that we have created for ourselves with, our earpods. And
for sure. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Okay, I think that we're gonna need to wrap up here. So any final words, Tim?
Well, I think one last thing that...
Nope, all right, you're done. Okay.
Dang it.
We need to go back to Victorian era manners.
Korean era? Is that what you said?
Victorian era manners.
You said Korean, right?
Victorian era.
Oh. Victorian, Korean, same thing.
Well, I've heard that Koreans can be quite polite, so I was
Victorian
Victorian.
Era.
Okay.
I'm going to put in one going away plug for apologies. They're always a great way For example, Carl, I'm sorry I said shut your face.
Yeah, you should be.
That was rude.
I would not apologize to you, Tim.
Squirrel got loose. And all your nuts.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I think this has been very informative and interesting and thought-provoking. So let's go out there and try to
Of course
be.
it has been. We're amazing.
That's true.
You know what I think?
I am
we
more
should-
amazing than every one of you, and I will try to condescend to speak to you again in the future.
Don't worry,
I
it's
think
how
we
I
should-
was raised, Cameron.
Our listeners should post their comments on our page.
That would be
Ooh,
good.
Polite comments,
Or
no all caps.
That's right. All right, and we'll see you guys next podcast back here. And until then, send lots of money.
Yay.
All right.